smirked across the conference table, tapped the frame of his Ivy League diploma, and said, "This is what real innovation looks like." I kept my expression neutral, fingers steady on my laptop keyboard. 7 years of my life sat in the code running his precious demo. The patent documents in my desk drawer suddenly felt heavier. Too bad he didn't know that the tech his entire launch depended on was mine. And it was about to vanish. My name is Natalie Morgan, and I've spent the last 7 years building something extraordinary in the shadows of Ether Tech Systems. At 36, I wasn't the youngest engineer in our automation division, nor was I the loudest. My diploma from Colorado Polytechnic Institute hung in a simple frame on my cubicle wall. No gold leaf, no Latin inscriptions, just clean black text on white paper. It represented 4 years of grinding through night classes while working 2 jobs, learning to code on outdated equipment because that's all we had. But that piece of paper meant everything to me. It was proof that I belonged here, among the glass towers and cutting-edge labs of one of the country's leading industrial automation companies. For 7 years, I'd poured myself into developing a revolutionary data processing system. While my colleagues chased flashy projects and quick wins, I worked quietly on something deeper, a framework that could reduce processing time by 90% while maintaining accuracy levels previously thought impossible. Late nights blurred into early mornings as I refined the algorithms, tested parameters, and built something that would change everything. The patent filing happened almost by accident. Our legal department had encouraged all engineers to protect their innovations, and I'd submitted the paperwork thinking it was just another formality. When the approval came through with a preliminary valuation of $9.5 million, I'd stared at the number until my eyes burned. That was my work, my creation, valued at more than I'd earn in a lifetime. I thought it would be my ticket to the senior engineering role I'd been working toward. I thought merit still mattered. Then Derek Langston arrived. He swept into EtherTech like a hurricane in a $3,000 suit, all gleaming teeth and firm handshakes. 42 years old, with silver just starting to thread through his perfectly styled hair. He came from the finance world with promises of disrupting our disruption and leveraging synergies. His Harvard MBA gleamed from his resume like a beacon, and the board of directors practically genuflected when he spoke. Our first team meeting set the tone for everything that followed. Derek had called us together in conference room A, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He'd arranged his credentials on the table like trophies: Harvard diploma, letters of recommendation from Fortune 500 CEOs, photos with tech luminaries. Innovation, he'd said, pacing in front of us like a professor addressing particularly slow students, comes from pedigree. It comes from understanding not just how things work, but how the world works. That's what an Ivy League education gives you: perspective. His eyes had swept over us, pausing on each engineer's face. When they reached mine, something flickered there. Dismissal, maybe, or amusement. "Now, I know some of you come from alternative educational backgrounds," he continued, and I felt my spine straighten. "And that's fine for execution. But vision, strategy, that requires a different caliber of thinking." The meeting had continued for another hour, but I barely heard any of it. My system, the one that would revolutionize our entire industry, hummed away on the servers 3 floors below, processing data at speeds that made our competitors look like they were using abacuses. But suddenly, none of that mattered. What mattered was the name on my diploma. What mattered was that I'd never rode crew or attended a legacy admission interview. What mattered was that Derek Langston had decided, in that moment, that I was not the kind of person who could truly innovate. He just didn't know yet that the innovation he'd soon stake his reputation on was already mine. The weeks that followed Derek's arrival became a masterclass in professional humiliation. It started small. During technical reviews, he'd cut me off mid-sentence with phrases like, "Let's hear from someone with a more comprehensive background." When I presented quarterly updates on my system's performance metrics that showed unprecedented efficiency gains, he'd nod absently while scrolling through his phone. then pivot to ask Brad Phillips from MIT about his thoughts on real innovation. I kept meticulous records. Every dismissed email, every meeting I was suddenly not required for, every time my name was mysteriously absent from project credits. My laptop became a vault of evidence, though I wasn't sure what I was building toward. Maybe I just needed proof that I wasn't imagining the systematic erasure of my contributions. The irony was suffocating. My data processing system had become the backbone of EtherTech's most ambitious project yet, a military contract for automated defense systems that could be worth $120 million. The generals and procurement officers who visited our facilities were impressed by the seamless integration, the flawless performance, the revolutionary approach to real-time data analysis. Derek preened like a peacock during these visits, gesturing broadly at our team's innovations while I sat in the back row, invisible. The beauty of our system, I heard him tell a Pentagon official over lunch, is that it's built on solid fundamentals. You need the right kind of minds, trained at the right institutions, to see these patterns. Lauren Brooks found me in the server room that afternoon, my favorite hiding spot when the executive floor became unbearable. She was one of the few allies I had left, a database architect who'd started the same year I did. "You look ready to punch something," she said, sliding down the wall to sit beside me. "Just checking the systems," I muttered, though we both knew I could monitor everything from my desk. Lauren was quiet for a moment, then, "You know he's planning something, right?" My fingers stilled on the keyboard. "What do you mean?" "I have a friend in legal. Derek's been asking about intellectual property transfers, specifically about innovations developed within the scope of employment. He's trying to argue that anything created on company time belongs entirely to EtherTech." The server room's hum suddenly seemed louder. "But I filed the patent independently. I used my own equipment for the initial development, my own time." "I know." Lauren's voice was gentle. "But he's building a case, and with his connections—" She didn't need to finish. With his connections, his pedigree, his silver tongue, Derek could rewrite history. Make it seem like my breakthrough was just another corporate asset, developed by committee, owned by the company, owned by him. That night, I pulled up the original patent filing. Every line of code, every algorithm, every innovation, it was all there, dated and certified, with my name as sole inventor. But looking at it felt like holding sand. I could feel it slipping through my fingers. The next morning's all-hands meeting delivered another blow. Derek announced a reorganization for optimization, reshuffling the entire engineering hierarchy. When the new org chart appeared on screen, my position had shifted sideways, technically the same level. But now reporting to Jason Hutchins, a recent Harvard grad with 18 months of experience and a tendency to call me Nat despite my corrections, these changes will ensure we're leveraging our best minds in the most strategic positions. Derek explained, his eyes finding mine across the room. Sometimes, the best contributors are those who know how to support rather than lead. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. After the meeting, I overheard him in the hallway with the CEO. "The military contract is progressing beautifully. My team has really delivered on the innovation front. Of course, we'll need to ensure all IP is properly secured before the final presentation." That's when I knew. He wasn't just dismissing me, he was erasing me. And in 3 weeks, when the Pentagon made their final decision, Derek Langston would stand on a stage and claim my life's work as his own triumph. Unless I did something about it. The legal department's office was a monument to corporate intimidation. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and portraits of stern-looking executives who'd built EtherTech from the ground up. I'd made an appointment with Sarah Chen, the head of intellectual property, hoping to clarify my position. "I'm afraid Mr. Langston has already briefed us on this matter," she said before I'd even finished explaining. Her manicured fingers drummed against a folder I recognized, my patent documentation. "The company's position is that all innovations developed using company resources fall under corporate ownership. But the initial development was refined and implemented using EtherTech systems, was it not?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'd advise you to focus on your current assignments, Ms. Morgan. These matters can become complicated. I left her office with my hands shaking. The message was clear: stay quiet, stay invisible, or face legal action I couldn't afford to fight. The breaking point came at the company's annual Tech Innovation Gala. It was the kind of event Derek lived for: champagne flutes, tech journalists, and investors mingling under crystal chandeliers. I'd tried to skip it, but attendance was strongly encouraged for all senior staff. So I stood near the bar in my one good dress, watching Derek work the room like a politician. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, tapping his champagne glass for attention. "I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible team behind our upcoming military contract." My stomach clenched as he began listing names: his Harvard recruits, the consulting team he'd brought in, even the marketing department. Then his eyes found mine across the room. "Of course, we've had technical contributors from all levels," he said, his tone shifting to something almost pitying. "Even our more modest team members have played their parts. Natalie Morgan, for instance, has been a reliable technical contributor. Not really an innovator, mind you, but solid execution. That's what you get from those small technical schools. Good worker bees." The room laughed politely. A few people glanced my way with sympathetic smiles that felt like knives. I set down my untouched champagne and walked out, my heels clicking against marble floors in a rhythm that matched my racing heart. I drove home in silence, my mind crystal clear for the first time in months. Derek hadn't just insulted me, he'd publicly diminished me in front of the entire industry. Technical contributor, worker bee, not really an innovator. The words echoed as I unlocked my apartment, as I opened my laptop, as I navigated to the system I'd built from nothing. The administrative portal welcomed me with familiar code, elegant and efficient. My creation, my innovation, the thing Derek was about to parade in front of military brass as his own achievement. I pulled up the licensing agreement, the one I'd structured carefully to maintain ownership while allowing EtherTech usage rights. There, buried in Section 7, Subsection 3, was the clause my lawyer had insisted on. License may be revoked with 72 hours notice in case of breach of contract, misrepresentation, or violation of inventor's moral rights. Public humiliation and attempted IP theft certainly qualified. I began drafting the revocation notice, each word precise and legally bulletproof. The demo for the Pentagon was in 4 days. If I timed this correctly, I'd give the legal minimum notice, 72 hours, which would expire exactly 24 hours before Derek's big moment. But first, I needed to prepare. I opened a new browser window and began researching startup incubators, independent contractors, anyone who might need a revolutionary data processing system. If I was going to burn this bridge, I'd better have somewhere to land on the other side. As midnight approached, I stared at the send button. Once I pressed it, there was no going back. Derek would know exactly who had pulled the rug out from under him. EtherTech would likely try to bury me in legal threats. But I thought about his smirk, his dismissive words, the way he'd reduced 7 years of groundbreaking work to technical contribution. I thought about every meeting I'd been excluded from, every email ignored, every attempt to claim credit for something he couldn't even understand. I thought about that Harvard diploma he loved to reference, and how he'd weaponized it against anyone he deemed unworthy. My finger hovered over the mouse. Somewhere across the city, Derek was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his upcoming triumph. He had no idea what was coming. The next 72 hours unfolded with military precision. At 11:47 p.m., I hit send on the revocation notice. The email went to legal. The entire board of directors, Derek, and, crucially, to Colonel Martinez, our primary contact at the Pentagon. The subject line was simple: patent license revocation notice, effective in 72 hours. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I methodically backed up every file, every email, every shred of evidence that proved my ownership of the system. 3 external drives, 2 cloud services, and a physical printout that I locked in my home safe. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd learned not to underestimate Derek's reach. The first response came at 6:23 a.m. from legal. Sarah's tone had shifted from condescending to alarmed. Ms. Morgan, this action seems precipitous. Perhaps we should discuss alternatives. I didn't reply. By noon, my company phone was buzzing nonstop. I turned it off and focused on my personal laptop, where interesting emails were starting to arrive. 3 startup founders had already reached out, having heard through the grapevine that something big was happening at EtherTech. News travels fast in tech circles, especially when it involves potential military contracts. Day 2 was for systematic extraction. I arrived at the office at 5 a.m., before even the most ambitious early birds. My personal items fit in one small box. I'd never been one for decorating. But the real work was in the code. Every system has backdoors, and I knew mine intimately. I began closing them one by one, removing my administrative access, deleting my personal optimization scripts, extracting every piece of code that wasn't explicitly covered by the patent. By the time my colleagues arrived, I'd turned the system from a finely tuned Ferrari into a locked vault that only I could open. Natalie! Jason Hutchins appeared at my cubicle, his Harvard tie slightly askew. Derek needs you in conference room A, now. I glanced at my watch. 43 hours left. I'm busy, I said, continuing to type. His face flushed. This isn't a request. It's about the military demo. Then Derek should have thought about that before publicly humiliating me at the gala. I kept my voice calm, professional. I'll be unavailable for meetings until further notice. The color drained from his face as the implications hit him. He practically ran back to the executive floor. Lauren found me an hour later, eyes wide. The entire C-suite is in panic mode. They're saying the system won't respond to anyone but you. That's correct. I closed another back door with a few keystrokes. It's functioning perfectly. But administrative access is restricted to the patent holder. But the demo is in 2 days. I finally looked up at her. And my license revocation takes effect in 39 hours. She whistled low. You're really doing this. He called me a worker bee. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Let's see how his hive functions without its queen. The final day was almost anticlimactic. I worked from home, fielding increasingly desperate calls from EtherTech's legal team. They offered everything: retroactive promotion, a public apology, even a substantial bonus. I responded to each with the same message. Please refer to Section 7, Subsection 3 of the licensing agreement. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with opportunities. A defense contractor in Virginia wanted to discuss an exclusive license. A Silicon Valley startup offered me CTO. Most intriguing was an email from General Morrison himself, asking if I'd consider consulting directly with the Pentagon. At exactly 11:47 p.m., 72 hours after sending the notice, I executed the final command. The system didn't shut down dramatically. It simply stopped accepting any inputs from EtherTech's servers. The code was still there, visible but untouchable, like a masterpiece behind museum glass. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back. Somewhere across the city, Derek's team was probably scrambling, trying to understand why their innovative system had become an elegant paperweight. The demo was in 24 hours, and they'd just lost access to the technology they'd been promising for months. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. Emergency all hands meeting tomorrow at 7 a.m. Derek looks like he's aged 10 years. I took a sip of wine and smiled. Tomorrow. Derek would stand in front of his Ivy League recruits, his executive team, and possibly some very angry Pentagon officials, and explain how he'd lost control of technology he'd claimed to understand. But tonight? Tonight was mine. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the startup offers. It was time to build something new, something that no one could ever take away from me again. The demo was scheduled for 2 p.m. at EtherTech's flagship presentation center. I wasn't there, of course, but Lauren texted me play-by-play updates from her hiding spot in the adjacent conference room. 2:03 p.m. Pentagon brass is here, 3 generals, Bunch of suits. Derek sweating through his Harvard tie. 2:07 p.m. They're starting the system demo. Derek's doing his usual peacock routine. 2:09 p.m. Oh shit. The main screen just went blue. Not BSOD, just blue. 2:11 p.m. Systems responding to basic inputs but won't access core processing. Derek's smile looks painted on. 2:13 p.m. It rushed in. They're typing frantically. Derek's explaining its routine maintenance delay. 2:17 p.m. 17 seconds. That's how long the system ran before freezing. I counted. I sat in my favorite coffee shop 3 blocks away, watching the autumn leaves fall. 17 seconds. Just long enough to show promise before revealing the void beneath. My phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the area code, Pentagon. Ms. Morgan? The voice was crisp, military. This is Colonel Martinez. We're experiencing some difficulties with the EtherTech demonstration. Our technical team traces the system architecture to a patent under your name. That's correct, Colonel. And EtherTech no longer has access to this technology? As of 11:47 last night, their license was revoked due to breach of contract and ethical violations. Silence. Then, are you available for a meeting tomorrow without EtherTech's involvement? By 3 p.m., the implosion was spectacular. Lauren's text came rapid fire. Emergency response team can't crack it. Someone just said your name, and Derek went purple. General Morrison asked directly why the patent holder isn't here. Holy hell, Derek just admitted they don't have system access. Pentagon delegation is leaving. Morrison looks murderous. The final text came at 3:47 p.m. Dumpster, fire, you beautiful genius. That evening, the tech blogs lit up. EtherTech demo disaster, $120 million contract in jeopardy. One insider had leaked that the demo crashed after less than 20 seconds, leaving executives scrambling to explain why their revolutionary system wouldn't respond to its own development team. Derek's LinkedIn post from that morning, excited to showcase our groundbreaking innovation to our defense partners, had already garnered hundreds of comments. The tech community loves nothing more than watching hubris meet reality. My apartment buzzer rang at 8 p.m. Through the security camera, I saw a familiar figure, Tom Reynolds, EtherTech's CEO. He looked like he'd aged a decade since the gala. Natalie, he said when I opened the door. May I come in? I let him sit on my second-hand couch, watching him take in my modest apartment. No Harvard Club memorabilia here, just shelves of programming books and a desk covered in startup contracts. Derek's been terminated, he said without preamble. The board made the decision an hour ago. I said nothing. We've lost the contract. The Pentagon is displeased. They're questioning our entire leadership structure. He rubbed his face. How did we not know the entire system depended on your personal patent? You didn't ask. I kept my voice neutral. Derek was too busy talking about pedigree to understand what he actually had. Tom winced. What would it take to restore the license? I'd been expecting this. Nothing. EtherTech had its chance. I've already accepted a position with a startup that values innovation over ivory towers. The military contract. Colonel Martinez called me directly. If the Pentagon wants to use my technology, they can negotiate with me. Or rather, with my new company. He stared at me, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time. Not the quiet engineer from a state school. Not the worker bee Derek had dismissed, but the person who'd built something revolutionary while they were comparing diplomas. We could sue, he said quietly. You could try. I smiled. But we both know how that would look. Tech giant sues female inventors. After exec publicly humiliated her. I'm sure the shareholders would love that PR nightmare. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We should have seen what was happening. After he left, I opened my laptop and began drafting my resignation letter. Short, professional, Effective immediately. No need to gloat. The empty system spoke louder than any words could. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the Pentagon directly. Next week, I'd start my new position as CTO of a company that judged people by their code, not their college. But tonight, I pulled up the EtherTech system one last time, still frozen, still waiting for my command. Derek's digital kingdom, built on technology he'd never bothered to understand, reduced to an expensive screensaver. I closed the laptop and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in months. The emergency board meeting was held in EtherTech's top-floor conference room, the one with the panoramic city views that Derek had loved to show off. I walked in at exactly 9 a.m., carrying nothing but a leather portfolio and 7 years of suppressed fury. The room fell silent. Board members lined one side of the table like judges at a tribunal. Derek sat at the far end, his Harvard confidence finally cracked, his tie was crooked, his face haggard. When our eyes met, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Ms. Morgan, the board chairman began, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I took the only empty seat directly across from Derek. I came as a courtesy. My position hasn't changed. Natalie, please. Derek leaned forward, his voice missing its usual condescension. This is all a misunderstanding. Your contributions have always been valued. My contributions? I opened my portfolio and laid out the documents one by one. Let's discuss my contributions, shall we? First, the original patent filing, filed independently, March 2019. Every algorithm, every innovation, every line of code that makes your system run. Second, the meeting transcripts. June through September, 2024. 17 instances of you cutting me off mid-presentation. 12 projects reassigned to your Harvard recruits. 0 credit given for my work. Third, screenshots from the gala security footage. October 15th, 11:43 p.m. You called me a worker bee and not really an innovator in front of 200 industry professionals. Fourth, the email chain with legal. Your attempts to transfer my patent to company ownership without my knowledge or consent. The room was tomb silent. One board member was reviewing the documents, his face growing paler with each page. But the most damning evidence, I continued, pulling out my phone. Is this? I played the recording, yes, I'd recorded it, of Derek in the hallway with Tom Reynolds. Once we secure the IP, we can phase her out completely. Can't have a state school grad as the face of our innovation. Derek's face went from pale to ashen. That was taken out of context. What context? I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. What possible context makes that acceptable? Ms. Morgan. The board chairman interrupted. What exactly are you asking for? Nothing. I smiled at their shocked faces. I'm not asking for anything. I'm here to explain why your $120 million contract is dead and why your star executive destroyed it. I stood, gathering my documents. Derek built his entire strategy on technology he didn't understand, couldn't access, and never owned. He was so busy polishing his Ivy League credentials that he forgot to check who actually held the keys to his kingdom. We could make you an offer, another board member said desperately. Name your price. My price? I looked directly at Derek. My price was respect, recognition, the basic courtesy of being heard in a meeting. That price was too high for Mr. Langston, apparently. Derek finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I was wrong. Yes, I agreed. You were. I underestimated you because of your background. I let my biases... He stopped, swallowed. I destroyed everything because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd get, and more than I'd expected. The Pentagon has already reached out to me directly, I informed the room. I'll be demonstrating my technology to them next week, under the banner of my new company. A company that judges innovation by results, not resumes. The board chairman cleared his throat. Is there anything that would convince you to reconsider? I paused at the door. looking back at the room full of powerful people who'd ignored me for years until I held something they needed. You had 7 years to value what I built. 7 years to see past my state school diploma to the work I was doing. Instead, you let him, I nodded at Derek, reduce me to nothing because I didn't fit his narrow definition of excellence. I opened the door, then turned back one last time. I was mocked for my degree. But you built your empire on something you never owned, something you never even tried to understand. The last thing I saw before the door closed was Derek's face, crumpled in defeat, his Harvard diploma visible on the wall behind him, like a monument to misplaced priorities. In the elevator down, I texted my new business partner. Meeting's done, they've got nothing. We move forward as planned. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with his reply. Pentagon contract draft just arrived. They're offering 30% above EtherTech's bid. I smiled as I walked through the lobby I'd entered so many times as an invisible employee. Today, everyone noticed me. Word had already spread. I was the engineer who'd brought down Derek Langston. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about the future I was about to build, one line of code at a time. 6 months later, I stood in my own conference room, smaller than EtherTech's, but with better lighting and no portraits of disapproving executives. My team of 12 engineers came from everywhere: community colleges, state schools, coding boot camps, and yes, even one from Princeton who'd gotten tired of the old boys club. The Pentagon contract had been signed within weeks of my departure from EtherTech. Colonel Martinez turned out to be a straight shooter who cared more about results than resumes. Our first successful deployment was completed in half the time EtherTech had projected, under budget, and with capabilities that exceeded specifications. Ma'am, my lead developer interrupted my thoughts. Business Week is here for the interview. I smoothed my blazer, still off the rack, but better quality now, and headed to meet them. The article would be titled, "The $9.5 million Revenge: How One Engineer's Patent Brought Down a Tech Giant's Ego." Not my choice of title, but accurate enough. EtherTech's stock had plummeted after losing the military contract. They'd laid off 30% of their workforce, mostly Derek's expensive Ivy League hires who couldn't deliver without my system. The board had undergone a complete restructuring. Tom Reynolds sent me a holiday card with a handwritten note. Lesson learned. Derek Langston had vanished from LinkedIn the day after his termination. Rumor had it he'd returned to finance, his tech revolution dreams as deflated as his ego. I didn't track his whereabouts. Living well was revenge enough. Ms. Morgan? The journalist, a young woman with sharp eyes and a state school class ring, smiled at me. Ready to tell your story? As we settled into the interview, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another acquisition offer, this time from a Fortune 500 company. They wanted my patents, my team, my innovations. The number they proposed had more zeros than I'd ever imagined earning in my lifetime. I declined it, just as I'd declined the others. Money had never been the point. The point was building something that mattered, with people who valued brilliance wherever it came from. The point was my senior developer, a single mom who'd learned to code at night school, presenting her breakthrough to the Pentagon brass without anyone questioning her credentials. The point was proving that innovation doesn't come with a pedigree. One last question, the journalist said as we wrapped up. Do you have any regrets about how things ended with EtherTech? I thought about it, really considered the question. Did I regret the nuclear option? The public humiliation of a man who'd tried to erase me? The bridges burned so thoroughly they'd never be rebuilt. No, I said finally. My only regret is that it took me 7 years to realize my worth wasn't determined by their validation. That night, I got an unexpected email. The subject line simply read, "From Colorado Polytechnic Institute." It was from the dean. They wanted to establish a scholarship in my name for women in engineering, funded by a percentage of my patent licensing fees. They'd already had inquiries from dozens of young women who'd read about my story, wanting to follow in my footsteps. I signed the agreement immediately. As I locked up the office that night, my office in my company, I thought about that moment when Derek had tapped his Harvard diploma and declared it the symbol of real innovation. He'd been wrong about so many things, but especially about that. Real innovation isn't about where you learned to code or whose signatures adorned your diploma. It's about seeing possibilities where others see limitations. It's about building something from nothing and having the courage to defend it. It's about knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, it's success that rewrites the rules of the game entirely. I drove home through the city lights, my Colorado Polytechnic diploma now hanging in my office next to the patent certificates. Tomorrow, we'd start work on version 2.0 of the system, with features that would make our current capabilities look primitive. But tonight, I'd toast with my team, my brilliant, diverse, underestimated team, to proving that innovation has no pedigree. And somewhere in his diminished corner of the world, Derek Langston would know that his empire had crumbled not because of market forces or bad luck, but because he'd mocked the wrong engineer's degree. The worker bee had become the queen of her own hive. And business was thriving. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what country or city you're tuning in from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this revenge story, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Natalie's situation? Let's discuss in the comments.